times. And the question is, what brought this along? Why are we in this state of perennial crisis? Part of it is that the Democratic Party had misjudged both the symbolism and the actual record of Barack Obama. He came in as the most liberal voting senator in the U.S. Senate, even though it was a little more than 2 years. He was not in the center of the party as had been maybe center-left as Bill Clinton. And from 2009 to 2016, he moved the Democratic Party far to the left. What do I mean by that, rather than just, issuing these rhetorical statements? I mean by that he took over the healthcare system and tried to nationalize it. He was pretty effective in doing so. We doubled the debt to $28 trillion. We have almost de facto zero interest rates. We enlarged the size of the federal government. And by the way, those were the critical mechanisms we'd always used in the past to achieve 3% economic growth. You could prime the pump by having very low interest rates. You could prime the pump by running large deficits. You could prime the pump by spreading entitlements and unemployment insurance. And we've used all three, and we never achieved 3% growth. First president in modern history who has not been able to do that. And then abroad, it was basically Obama's belief that the United States in some way in the post-war order had been culpable. So whether it was the Middle East, Obama basically thought that the Iranians and the Shia were revolutionary people and they were oppressed in the way that people had been oppressed in the United States, and it was time to even the ledger, so to speak. And so he pulled away from the Sunni Gulf monarchies, Jordan and Egypt, Israel especially, and tilted toward Iran on the belief that this was a revolutionary government and we could give concession after concession after concession without telling the American people what Ben Rhodes said was the echo chamber that they created through journalism. And then we could delay the development of a nuclear weapon until after Obama had left office. There was reset with Russia. There was a Libyan bombing in Benghazi. There was a Cairo speech. There was the outreach to Venezuela, but especially Cuba. And it's all can be summed up by the idea that the United States had been culpable, and it was time that somebody recognized that its preeminent role in the world was neither warranted nor moral. In that calculus, people forgot something, that was not in tune with the American people. So quite soon after that election, Democrats did a very funny thing. They were no longer empirical. Had they been empirical, they would have said, well, we're going to run Obama because he's young, he's charismatic, people would like the idea of having the first African-American president, and most importantly, there's widespread anger at the Iraq War. There's widespread doubt and uncertainty because of the September 14th, 2008 meltdown. There's widespread uncertainty because this is the first election in almost 40 years where there is not an incumbent vice president or president running for election. It's an orphaned election, and so it's wide open. And Obama has a chance in a time when his message and his record would not have a chance. So in other words, they didn't say themselves, while he is a landmark personal figure, the agenda and the cargo he brings is way to the left of the American people. And then they learned to their bitter disappointment that Obama, being a narcissist and self-involved, was worried about Obama's popularity, which is much lower each month than was George Bush's, until 2016, when the bright idea came into his head, when he was about 42% approval rating in January, that the less you heard of Obama, the less you saw of him, the more you liked. And he turned over the international stage to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and for the first time, he went way up in popularity, 52%. All that hid the fact that the record and the agenda was not something that the American people wanted. And I'm not just saying that again. Over that 8-year period, he lost 98 state legislatures, 32 governorships, the House, the Senate, now the Presidency, and the Supreme Court, 1,100 local and state elections. The Democrats did. They have less political power than any time since 1920, and yet they're enamored with Obama still. Los Angeles wants to name a boulevard after him. The Democrats should not name a boulevard after him. The Republicans should name a boulevard after him. Because he's been the greatest gift to the conservative movement that we've ever seen. And so they're frustrated. They love Obama, but they discovered in this election that his election formula, ginning up block minority voting in the inner city on a message of anger and unfairness and culpability on the part of America, was not transferable to a 69-year-old multimillionaire white woman engaged in scandal like Hillary Clinton. So she inherited all the downside of turning off the white working classes and the middle classes in general. All she did was she rebranded the clingers into the irredeemables and the deplorables. And that's okay if you can get 96% of the black vote, 76% of the Hispanic vote, 72% of the Asian vote, and they register and come out. But if they don't, and they feel that Hillary Clinton does not resonate in a tribal sense like Barack Obama did, then she got the downside of Obama, and she didn't get the upside. And so she lost the election. And so the Democrats look at themselves and they say, Obama is such a wonderful person, but we've lost all political power the last 8 years. The formula that we thought, remember these books that were published, the next 50 years of Democratic reign, the new Democratic supremacy? It doesn't happen. And now they're frustrated because they don't know how to interpret the past that was so unkind to them. And yet, in these 4 special elections we've had, they haven't hit on a formula. And to add insult to injury, the emissary of their unhappiness is a guy with orange skin, yellow hair, a tie too long, a billionaire Manhattan real estate person who is running as a populist and who has a vocabulary of about 1,000 words that includes tremendous, great, awesome. In class terms, because remember now, the Democratic Party is a pyramid. It's a medieval party. It's got a small capstone of wealthy, wealthy people who live on the coast, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, Wall Street, whose main article of faith is they have a utopian vision that they push with the assumption that the ramifications of their own ideology never apply to themselves. They're big global warmists, but they do not want to give up their corporate jets. They believe that no one should have school choice, but they want to put their kids in a private academy, et cetera, et cetera. So that group detests Donald Trump. His accent's from Queens. He eats fast food. He gobbles down Haagen-Dazs and supposedly has 2 scoops and only gives you 1. And this cultural and class disdain extends even to our colleagues, many of my colleagues, some of my best friends that I've known for 25 years in the conservative movement. Because I can tell you that all conservative institutions, perhaps this one, I know it happened at the Hoover Institution. I'm on the Bradley board. I'm associated with National Review, sort of associated with. There were 9 senior writers, and I kept finding myself 8 to 1, 8 to 1, 8 to 1 in my willingness to vote for Donald Trump. But the point is that the conservative elite found him unpalatable. And they couldn't deal with this paradox. The message messenger, message messenger, message messenger. They were convinced that to justify their own class disdain for Trump, they could say that he really wasn't conservative. And indeed, in the 80s and 70s, he'd said some very liberal and stupid things. He said he wanted to impeach George W. Bush at one time. But he ran on a conservative agenda, and there was no chance that he was going to, as alleged by never Trump Republicans, he was going to appoint his sister to the Supreme Court. Or he was going to try to create a bigger health care plan than Obama. It's things like that. It just wasn't going to happen because he was on record. And what they were, I think, a little upset was Trump made an argument, and it was unpalatable because he said the Republican opposition to Obamaism and the shift from democratic liberalism to radical progressivism was not halted by the Republican establishment. I don't know if they could have halted it, but they surely halted it politically. And Trump's message was, if you win 1,100 elections and you win the House and Senate, you've repudiated this Obama movement, and yet when we look at it, the culture, the civilization, the issues are all incredibly moving left. Obama said this, I do not believe in gay marriage in 2008. In 2015, if you didn't believe in LGBT bathrooms, you're a homophobe. That's a radical shift. And so Trump comes along and says, again, a billionaire with orange skin and this yellow hair, and he has this weird accent also, and he says, there's too many people that are victims of globalization. And so when I hear my colleagues on the Republican right and the elite, they all say, he's anti-free trade, and I'd always ask them, do you wake up, do you, Mr. or you, Mrs., wake up in the morning and somebody says, you know that column for 750 words that your livelihood depends on? We just outsource it to a guy in Korea. He can do a much better job for $100. Doesn't happen to us, does it? And as I said to another person, when you want to get your kids into, you say affirmative action's kind of bothersome, but you're willing to put up with it. When you get your child and they grow up in Bakersfield and have a straight A average, and they can't get into Stanford with high test scores, do they call somebody they know at Stanford? You do, and you do, and you do, and they do. And so we had an elite on the coast that can navigate around these liberal landmines, and they felt they weren't too bad. Take illegal immigration. I had great arguments with many people in the conservative movement, and they said, well, comprehensive immigration, the position of Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush. And I said, that's fine. How many times has somebody hit your car and left the scene of that accident? 1, 2, 3? How many times have you woke up in the morning and you found a dead person in your orchard? 1, 2, 3? How many times have your kids had to go to school with metal detectors? How many times has somebody who's a second or third generation Spanish person, Mexican American, told you that they're moving out of your hometown because there's too many illegal immigrants? How many times do you think people have told you that they're going, that of Mexican American extraction, they're going to vote for Donald Trump? 45%, I think, in some counties in Fresno, Central California. So we had created an elite that was somewhat distanced, as wonderful as their support for the main conservative agenda was, and they missed entirely this idea that Donald Trump was a viable candidate. Came to me, I mean, he wasn't, I guess we've all used, if you use this word, I've used it to death. I've said, Donald Trump was not my first choice in the nomination. But after the nomination was over, it was between Hillary, he was so more preferred. Yes, we all say that, except the never Trump people. But Donald Trump hit on something: trade, jobs, illegal immigration. And what his message was is a particular subset of middle America between the two coasts always pays the price for someone else's smug idealism. And the problem is it's not just left wing anymore, it's people in the Republican establishment.